Welcome to week 6 of the Atlantic Huddle. Today we have a little bit of a change up for you. We're hosting our first facility discussion, our first facility panel discussion titled Not in My Space. So just to start off with some introductions, my name is Matt Moore and I'm the current chair of Event Atlantic. And a couple housekeeping items for those of you that are new joining us on the webinar series today. We do record our discussions just for the opportunity for those that are unable to make the meeting to circle back to either the Event Atlantic website or the Events Nova Scotia website to review the discussion. And although we do ask everyone to stay on mute kind of during the presentation, we strongly encourage this to be an informal, open discussion. So if you do have questions at any time, feel free to chime into the conversation. Again, for those that are new, Atlantic Huddle's an educational webinar series presented by Events Nova Scotia and Event Atlantic, and we've been discussing for the last 6 weeks a variety of different challenges and opportunities in the industry relative to COVID-19. Quick summary of Event Atlantic. We are a member-based registered nonprofit society that provides networking and educational opportunities while serving as the leading advocate for the event industry in Atlantic Canada. Event Atlantics continue to bring Atlantic Canadian cities and destinations together to strengthen the spirit of collaboration and event hostings, and we strive to create opportunities for developing new business through partnership and learning. So again, eventatlantic.ca for more information. And our ally partners in this initiative, Events Nova Scotia, a branch of the Department of Community Culture and Heritage, is here to help communities develop and adapt events as well as support ongoing efforts due to COVID-19 recovery. Their work is guided by the Nova Scotia event strategy, and that strategy is focusing on the development and attraction of and funding of events through a variety of key pillars. So again, check out the Event Nova Scotia website as well. So again, my name is Matt Moore, the general manager at the RATH Eastlink Community Center, also the chair of Events Truro Colchester here regionally as our event attraction brand. I'll be joining Sheena McCrate on the call today, as well as Susan Freeman and Bobby Despres. So just to give you a little bit of bio of all of our speakers today. My past experience has also included some development work in Fort McMurray with the launch of the McDonald Island Park Complex back in 2009, and the development and launch of the Potash Corp Civic Center in Sussex, New Brunswick. Sheena McCrate is the CEO of St. John's Sports and Entertainment, which manages and operates Mile One Center and the St. John's Convention Center. She joined the organization in 2007 as a senior manager of events and became the CEO in 2014. Sheena is a board member of Sport Tourism Canada, Destination St. John's, and the Newfoundland Provincial Sports Center. Also on the call today is Susan Freeman. Welcome, Susan. Susan's the Executive Director of Meetings and Conventions, PEI. She has over 20 years of hospitality experience in both sales and conference services, and presently enjoys collaborating with industry colleagues on the MPI Atlantic Board and the DMAC Board. And without further ado, we have Bobby Despres. Bobby was late providing the bio, so I was planning to make up whatever I wanted. Bobby's actually a fellow board member with Event Atlantic and is representing the City of Fredericton as their sport tourism coordinator, and he's been very involved in supporting the development and operation of their municipal facilities. Bobby oversees special event bookings at their municipal sport venues, including the Grant Harvey Center and Willie O'Ree Place. And Bobby has 20 years experience in sport and recreation and is a board member with Softball New Brunswick and a master coach developer with Softball Canada. So a pretty well-rounded panel we have today for our discussion. And again, I have a series of questions that I'm gonna ask my colleagues here and encourage great feedback from everybody involved. So to kick things off with our first question of the day, I'd like to ask our panelists, when this COVID-19 first hit us back in March, what were your initial thoughts on how COVID was going to affect your operations? I know it's a broad question, but I can think back to my first perspective when I heard that COVID was starting to impact our operation. And personally, I felt like it was only going to have a negative impact on major events. Our first canceled event was the World Women's Hockey Championship that we were co-hosting with the City of Halifax. We were a mere 10 days away from hosting that event, and soon began to realize that it was beginning to unravel in front of us. And our first reaction, my first reaction, was that this is just one event. Hopefully we can pick things up, postpone it a few weeks, a few months, whatever it may be. And now here we all are. So I turn it over to our other panelists. What were your first reaction, guys, to having this news?
I can say, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I'll jump in. So representing, I guess, speaking specifically about the convention center, even though we do operate 2 venues, I'm going to tell you in a very naive way, I did not foresee that this would be as prolonged as we are into. So if I can maybe just make mention of Malwan Center, we have 2 tenants. We have a hockey team and a basketball team. So immediately they announced suspensions to their season, but they didn't announce an outright cancellation. But as groups like the NHL announced the cancellation, it became more and more obvious what was happening, you know, in terms of the longevity of this COVID-19 situation. At the convention center, we were just coming out of March and into April, May, and June is typically our busiest period, particularly June. So we were just coming through the winter and just ramping up for our busy, you know, 3 kind of pre-summer season, and everything just came to a screeching halt. And those events, because they entail, you know, much bigger budgets for the most part, and travel and people having to get notification in a much longer time frame, you saw a bunch of those cancel, or I shouldn't say cancel, they postponed, and there was a quick scurry to see if they could all fit in the fall. Because I think, again, everybody was thinking, kind of, you know, buckle down, get through the next 3 or 4 months, and then this will all come around in the fall. And so that was what happened first. At the convention center, everything postponed until the fall. And then as time went on, again, it became much more obvious that this was not going to be a brief interruption to our operations. It was going to be a prolonged interruption. Mm-hmm. So that was my first take on it. Call me naive, call me, you know, not worldly enough to figure out that pandemic lasts more than a month. Mm. That's that.
That's great. Susan, what were your first thoughts?
Well, I actually, I had a call from a local CBC reporter a few days before the shutdown, you know, asking about what my thoughts would be on the meeting and convention sector in Prince Edward Island and what would be happening with events that were due to happen over the next few months. And she asked me if I was losing sleep over anything, and my reply is, along with Sheena's, was very naive in saying I don't really know why I would lose sleep over something that I really can't control. And I clearly remember being at the PEI Convention Center in the Delta Prince Edward, in the lobby, talking to the general manager on the day that everything shut down, and it was full of U Sport athletes that were women just about to take the ice at University of Prince Edward Island, and the place was hopping and bustling and everyone was happy. And I even commented on the great vibe that was going on. And you know, it wasn't too long after I got home at the end of that day that I started to get the texts and emails that everything was being shut down. And I don't even know, I think those ladies got to finish their game, but there were no more after that. So we were very busy in the first initial weeks, moving everything, as everyone else was, into future years, and dealing with all of our 217 members across Prince Edward Island to see what we would do with everything that was scheduled, and liaising with them on what we needed to do. And certainly, I think like everyone else, we thought it would be a few months and things would settle down and we'd get back to business. But we now know we're in it for the long haul, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Bobby, how did you handle the news?
It was surreal, and it's not a word that I use too often. And you know, looking back and reflecting now, it almost felt like I was in one of those made for TV movies, and it wasn't one of the Hallmark ones with a happy ending at this moment. It was, we were in the midst of hosting the CCA Volleyball Nationals at the Grant Harvey Center, and we had just worked, you know, a week beforehand transitioning the arena to a, you know, a beautiful volleyball complex. We were chipping, you know, bleachers out of ice to get them into the venue to make them look better because we got hit with an ice storm just before this. And I remember we played the first match, and the CCA officials came over and said, you know, basically everything across the country shutting down. You can finish the event without fans, but that's it. So it was literally going from preparing for a great event to basically a participant only event. And it was rough because at the same time, I received 4 phone calls that day of event cancellations and or postponements. You know, an international tennis event was supposed to start the following Tuesday, and we had wheelchair basketball Eastern Canadians at the same time. So those of you who are in the events world, you understand the adrenaline high of events. And, you know, as COVID hit, we literally had just finished cleaning up the Grant Harvey Center, removing the sport court, the volleyball systems, getting the ice back, when we were told by our employer that we're not coming back to work the next day. And you can only imagine going from that emotional high of, you know, events and loving everything what we do to the absolute valley of what is this? You know, I saw it on CNN. It only happens elsewhere. Nothing ever really affects us. And then all of a sudden it was a reality of, we don't know what's going on. There's a lot of information, both true and both false in the world. You know, it's detailing down through what was actually there, and just trying to ensure that, you know, we remain calm. But the scariest part is that we, much like everybody else in this panel, we truly didn't appreciate what we were getting into. And here we are 8 months later, and we're only hitting the start of a second wave. So from an operations perspective, it was scary, it was difficult, and I'll say it one more time, surreal.
Absolutely. 2018, if many of you may recall, Sport Tourism Canada reported that Atlantic Canada's success in sport tourism economic impact was valued at $1.8 billion, which is massive for our smaller economies. I think many of us, whether you're a venue or a promoter, municipality, we're all starting to hit our strides in event tourism. Like 2020 was meant to be our year. We had World Women's, we had just about started, you know, a Junior A playoff drive. We had a couple of concerts, and we had Jackalope Atlantic with Tony Hawk all coming in the spring. And you fast forward a week after the announcement of the cancellations, and here we are as a multi-purpose sport and recreation venue that typically has 130 staff actively engaged in hosting events and programs, to 7 staff left. And no, we're not drained because we've just hosted a variety of major events. We're drained and shell-shocked because we're in the middle of a pandemic and don't know what the next news article is going to deliver for us. So I'd like to hear from the rest of the panel, just how has COVID affected your facilities and your venues? Like you say, it's been 8 months now. Where are you at today? I'll start with you, Bobby.
The headache of today. It's an interesting world. It's so fluid. And what I mean by that is that every morning when I wake up, I'm almost afraid to check my emails and see what's happening today at our venues. And, you know, with that, things have returned to a quasi-normal, whatever that normal is in our venue. So, you know, large gatherings, major special events, you know, they're just non-existent at the moment. And, you know, there's a couple groups, for instance, Quebec Major Junior League and the Maritime Junior A League, who have received provincial exemptions from the province of New Brunswick to allow larger capacity crowds. Well, as we can imagine, when somebody else has a shiny object and other people want to see that shiny object or have what they have, it creates a lot of differences. So, you know, when we first reopened the venues, it was interesting because at that moment, you're only allowed 50 in a venue. And now it's, since, you know, the capacities have grown, but it's still having to make choices. So for instance, for a U11 hockey game, there's only, you know, 2 parents who may be able to go, or 2 people may be able to join them. So there's difficult decisions made. You can no longer show up with your following of grandparents and neighbors and siblings and whatever, whoever else you bring with you. But it's not just that. It's affected a lot of different people, and not just our venues itself. It's also affected the community. So when you look at things, our partners, our hotel partners, our restaurants, everybody's affected when we can't operate, or when, you know, we're in a pandemic state as we are today. It's hard to see the fact that, you know, our hotel occupancies are down, our restaurant occupancies are down, you know, because of sport itself, or because of major events that we host at our venues. So it's hard to see. It's kind of the same, because if you walk into one of our venues, you still see minor sports happening. However, it's a total different model. And, you know, hopefully we get back to our new normal soon.
Absolutely. Susan and Sheena, do you have anything you could add to that question? Just curious, it's been 8 months. We've all made a little bit of progress now. Bobby, you outlined obviously the impact of that whole supply chain of vendors and operators and hospitality sector that are supporting, you know, sport, recreation, and major events. What have you guys seen, Susan and Sheena?
I can go. With a lot of our venues that would normally be hosting events and conferences, meetings, there are many of them that aren't even hosting anything right now because they don't have enough space to socially distance. They don't have enough exits and entrances and washroom facilities, so they're choosing not to even host anything. But there are, you know, many of our members that have put together all the cleaning protocols and all the social distance and have their operational plans done. And so those that are open are certainly being utilized for meetings and conferences, day meetings. But it has affected everything in that supply chain as well. You know, we normally wouldn't get excited about hosting a 10-person conference for 3 days in August. But that was a huge silver lining for us this summer that happened. And there were a few of them. So we're just taking the small wins right now and working with the venues to make sure that they know what protocols need to be in place. And I think some operators were also paralyzed by everything that they felt like they needed to do to get open. So a lot of them did just make the choice to not open because of cost and of all the protocols, extra staffing that they just didn't have access to do so. So it's very challenging, that's for sure. But the ones that are open and running are doing a great job here in PEI, and we thank them for it every day.
Certainly feels like many of us have really had to walk the line of balancing our responsibilities to provide some levels of community service, but also a business case. And in some situations, there just wasn't a strong enough business case to enable the service. So,
yeah.
Sheena, how are you doing after 8 months?
We're not doing too bad. I mean, so in fact, I'm kind of watching because any minute now there's going to be an announcement by the ECHL, which is the league that the hockey team plays out of. And as much as we've internally known, I mean, whether you're familiar with the ECHL or not, they are a primarily US-based league. They have 2 Canadian franchises, one of which is ours. I don't need to tell you what's happening in the States. So, and as part of this Atlantic bubble, never mind the rest of the country, this idea of teams traveling in and out and quarantining for 14 days makes it, you know, in addition to lots of other things, namely the reduced capacity, make it just not viable for this year. So about a month ago, they announced that league announced that there would be a split start to the season, and the teams would, about 20 of the 26 teams, half would start playing in December, the other half in January, and the Growlers were included in January. Even then, we kind of knew it was just like, you know, they would eventually get around to making a final decision and an announcement. So that's coming within minutes now to say that they were done for this year. The NBL has recently, that's the basketball group, they announced last Friday that they're targeting a start of March 21st. So kind of unofficially knowing that, there wasn't really going to be a season. We actually had restructuring. We went through some restructuring about 6 weeks ago. And the idea was that not having the crystal ball and not knowing when we're going to be back to, some, semblance of normalcy with respect to events or any size of events, I needed people, and there's an expectation, to be clear, to demonstrate savings. I was better off, if I could use the term, without the people when there are no events, so that when I needed them to come back, and we all know that it's not that you bring them back to work on the day of the event. They need to be in place and leading up to the event. Like, that's where the heavy lifting comes in. So we've had 30% of our workforce impacted. Saying that, prior to getting to that point, I tried everything I could think of that would work within the confines of the public health guidelines to repurpose the buildings to come up with different uses. So at the convention center, I approached the Department of Justice, who I knew was completely backlogged with respect to their hearings and jury selections and all those kinds of proceedings, and said, hey, check us out. We have space that we can transform into whatever you need it to be. We can socially distance, physically distance people. We can set up the room in such a way that if you need to, have it a hybrid where it's in person and virtual, we can do all of that if you want to use our space. As it turns out, they had other space in mind, schools that the province owns that are no longer in use, so that's what they're using. But I tried that. I reached out to the hospitals to see if there was a need from there. So thinking about the convention space, but in a completely different way. Meanwhile, the whole time in the background, you're dealing with, and our department's call is Service NL, you're dealing with them because you're convincing them as a venue that you can meet all the requirements and have people gather safely. And, to their credit, like, these people a year ago weren't reviewing COVID-19 plans, reopening plans as part of their everyday job. So they kind of got thrown into that, like the rest of us, to try and say, okay, is this plan actually going to meet the guidelines? Do I have a level of comfort that this venue is going to do what they say that they outline they're going to do? Do I approve 1,500 people potentially over the course of a day meeting in this venue? And so it's been a bit of a balancing act back and forth to try and, like, for want of a better description, dream up things to put at Mullen Center and at the convention center to keep the buildings relevant and top of mind and use the space, create some work for people, give some hours to people. I'm not looking to make a ton of money. I'm just looking to use the space, but also, not minimizing the importance of the fact or the severity of the fact that we are in a pandemic and that we can't be seen to be, like, at all costs just trying to get people together for the sake of getting people together. We still have to wear the masks and, and with that, I'm talking to a bunch of people who are in the events business. With that comes a whole extra layer of cost for staffing and PPE and cleaning and all of that kind of stuff. So you're doing it really, in my mind, the reason that we're trying to do what we're doing is really to stay relevant. That's what we're doing it for, more than any other, purpose. Certainly not to make money.
Absolutely, and it is like what Susan said. It is focusing on the small wins, and if we're unable to host, our typical large gatherings and exciting sporting events and programming, then what can we do? And I found myself after shell shock for a couple days, and going through a significant layoff of our staff team. Found myself in contract negotiations, I shouldn't say contract negotiations, developing an MOU with our next door neighbors, our local hospital. We've actually converted our arena into a temporary field hospital in the event that, it could be used for that matter. So it doesn't feel like a positive outcome as a result of a pandemic, but it is a role that we found ourselves having to play in the event that a major emergency situation would be required for the province. So I think it's important for us all to think outside the box of, well, how else can we support our community if not in typical manner that we prefer to do so. So have there been any, I'd like to try to keep the conversation as positive as we can. Has there been any other positive outcomes that folks would like to share with us, whether you're on the panel or you're just joining the call? I think a lot of us as venue operators can relate to the downtime. This was the ideal time for us to tackle some intrusive maintenance projects. I know for one in our region now has been also the time for collaboration more than ever working more closely with our neighboring healthcare department, working closely with other small business to help them find outside the box opportunities for them to continue to manage their operations. Does anybody have some success stories they'd want to share with us?
I can. I'm sure Wayne has been on here talking about the very big success of the Canadian Premier League being hosted in Prince Edward Island this summer. So, you know, you just mentioned collaboration, and we had a very small part in it at Meetings and Conventions PEI, but it took the big and the small parts of everyone joining together, from the PEI Tourism, SCORE, UPEI, the Chief Public Health Office, the Delta Prince Edward, all the food restaurants in Charlottetown. We all collaborated together and communicated on a regular basis during that time, and we have a fantastic, just to toot our own horn a little bit, testimonial video on the Meetings and Conventions PEI Facebook page that shows, just from the commissioner of the league, that shows just what happens when a group of people collaborate together to make something happen, especially in Atlantic Canada.
Mhm.
We're all very proud of what we do as Atlantic Canadians, and we do great things when we join together, and this was a huge testament to a wonderful, successful, great, big, huge silver lining, and a Hail Mary, really, for Prince Edward Island, for our summer. So that was a really great success story for us here for PEI.
Absolutely. Bobby, do you have any wins from Fredericton you'd like to share?
Yeah, you know, it just building off the whole collaboration aspect. It's been different. It's, you know, with operations slowing down a little bit, for once we're not firing 100% on all cylinders. So it afforded us the opportunity to sit down and create some more interdepartmental relationships internally with the city and externally with our partners in the hospitality industry as well. And, you know, just to be able to afford yourself the opportunity to sit down and go over some policy and procedures, as boring as that sounds on paper, it actually works well with the, you know, the folks on the ground who are operating and you know, organizing events and working with the groups locally to actually have a conversation with them and build some further relationships. And it's interesting because a lot of these external groups now are actually advocates for the city in regard to how we operate our venue, and knowing fully that we're looking after, you know, staff safety and patron safety first, they're willing to pull the rope with us a little bit more. Usually the municipality's on the critique side of things, whereas we're not doing enough for folks. But now we have some champions on the outside who are actually working with us to, you know, saying, look, the city's doing what they can. We're working with them internally. You know, it was our opportunity, as you mentioned, Matt, to do some maintenance in the buildings. You know, we never usually get a time for that, as everything's always gun ho all the time. But, you know, it's been different. And I'll still leave it at that. As though, you know, integrating technology with some different things that we do has been positive, it's still different.
And the only, I'm not to, you know, I mean, I think we've kind of said it. I would say that this exact forum is one of the positives, right? Like this group of people getting to, and, you know, some of you I've met before and some of, you know, we've communicated, but it just reinforces the fact that there are others in this industry doing the same thing, having the same experiences. But when we get out of this and we're all still standing, that you've created some of those new relationships that you can start to lean on people and share information. And so I do think that that's definitely a benefit of, you know, I've been asked to be on more task forces than I can shake a stick at. But with that comes meeting new people and, again, sharing information. And yes, I think everybody has, you know, dusted off the policy book and done all that fun stuff that you just do off the corner of your desk. So you try to, you know, make that a little bit of a priority, and doing maintenance with our own forces, as opposed to having to, and we've saved ourselves some money in that. So not outsourcing it to a contractor. It's taken us a little bit longer, but again, it was like, well, there's no big rush. So yeah, we'll do that LED lamping relight ourselves. We'll do that ourselves. And that, I think, has a way of also retaining information in-house as well. Like people who do the work for you and stay and work for you, if something goes wrong or something needs to change, you're not going back to the contractor. It's housed within your organization. That knowledge about, you know, anything with that particular project is kind of encapsulated with us.
Mhm.
So that would be my positives.
So going from facility closures to the point where, you know, we all at different timelines through our individual public health departments were able to begin reopening and reintroducing programming and activities back to the community. Let's talk a little bit about just that process and some of the challenges that may have been had in the process of opening. I for one felt that it felt very similar, like any business reopening or relaunching a business or opening a new facility for the first time. We quickly realized that, you know, what we had essentially done in the past and our policies and procedures and our org chart, and it was going to remain in the past. We recognized that as we were beginning to rebuild, our staff team needed to be flexible. Many staff that were recalled there was an expectation to wear multiple hats and take on new responsibilities until we got to the point we could further delegate and recall additional support. But I think there was also, and it still remains today, there's a bit of the added stressors that come with working in the public and not knowing what next week is going to bring us. I certainly can sense in the community that unintentionally, but people are carrying additional stress than what they have certainly carried in the past. So are there any specific challenges that our panelists can share with me and the rest of our group that you've encountered through the process of reopening?
Bobby's shaking his head. I think he wants to speak.
You know, I find this whole situation is fluid, but it almost feels like you're trying to catch a cloud in your hands. The minute you think you have it, you don't have it anymore. And what I mean by that is quite often for New Brunswick, the government would have a press conference on a Friday afternoon and make a major announcement with many changes, and they would say it's effective immediately. And you know, we didn't really receive any inside information that these were the changes coming so that we could adjust our programming accordingly. So for instance, in June, they announced that arenas could open, and you know, citizens and some groups expected the arenas to be open the very next day. Well, unbeknownst to them, we didn't have a heads up that arenas were opening, and it takes time to make ice. It takes time to get everything in place. So it's a hard one with the fluidity of everything. And, you know, even today, I think I'm on arena reopening phase number 8,433 at the moment of different changes as we go down. And now it's because we live in the bubble, it's a weird thing because, you know, I was saying this morning to my director that it almost feels like at times you're standing in the middle of the room and all four walls are on fire. You know, between Maine, Quebec, Ontario around us with case surges, and New Brunswick and the Maritime provinces and Atlantic provinces doing very well, everybody wants to return to normal. But if we drop our guard and we lose some of that resiliency that we have, if we drop our guard and go too far too fast, we could put ourselves in a bad spot. And as a community arena or community gathering space, that's a hotbed, right? So we have to operate very cautiously as we go forward. And making sure that every single thing we do, you know, it's there. So one of the hardest things right now, and one of the biggest challenges, is grandparents. And I say that in a weird way, but they really want to go watch their kid play U11 hockey. They really want to go watch their granddaughter figure skate. And it's hard when you have capacity issues that, you know, we have capacities that we just can't exceed. And, you know, during some of those press conferences, I would receive calls from clients at that exact moment asking me to have all the answers. And I honestly was in shell shock with them as I was receiving those messages, and we don't have all the answers. So a lot of the biggest challenges is just the consistency of things. You know, it's applying certain rules to certain things and then expecting it to go across the board. You know, if you go on Facebook at any which time, you'll see everybody saying that, oh, we can put XYZ number of people into a big box store. However, a big box store is not a community-owned municipal arena in which we're trying to make sure that everybody has a place to go. Yes, it's great for mental health for all the kids. However, it's not truly an essential place where we go pick up food and supplies to live our day-to-day lives. And it's hard getting the concept of that.
Absolutely. Just that sort of leaves us into our next discussion point on just the new normal and how our audiences and communities have embraced the new normal. Here in our region, I would say that, we all understand that people are adaptable. 90% of the public that accesses our facility and uses it regularly have been pretty understanding and have been supporters of new policies and procedures that we've had to put in place, just because they value their health and controlled social gathering limits that are in place, and it was a priority for them to get back. But there's that very vocal 10 or 5% that have been challenging it, and I think they often are misled into thinking that we're making up the rules based on our assumptions. We're very quick to adapt policies to align with public health. We don't create. So, Susan, tell me a little bit about your audience. I think that the audience, from what I've seen in Charlottetown, could be quite a bit different from what I would see, in Halifax. So I'd be interested to hear your feedback on public perception.
I think that people in Prince Edward Island are certainly adapting to the new normal. Masks have just become mandatory as of Friday here in Prince Edward Island. So we held off with that policy for several months after other provinces, but when you would go out and about, you would see, I'm going to say about 75% of the people in any store having a mask on anyways. So, they were adapting to what they knew was the best practice that they should just do for their own health and for the health and safety of Islanders. We've hosted, the PEI Crafts Council just had their annual craft fair in person this past weekend, and I think attendance was up and sales were up. So Islanders are supporting local, and they're doing so very, very proudly. It's just that I think you get that little bit of a sentiment that, now we're seeing some spikes in Nova Scotia and Halifax, and we're seeing some spikes in the Moncton area. So you get that sort of fear factor going on a bit that, okay, well, we're not going to go Christmas shopping, off island this year, which is a great thing for our economy. But it's just like Bobby said, you take one step forward and think that you can move ahead with a few things, and then you're taking about 25 back because something happens. And I think it is a very fluid situation, and it changes on a daily basis.
Sheena, are residents in your community embracing the new normal, or has there been some resistance?
I think it depends on who you talk to. I think that, you've got probably younger families who, let's say if they are inclined to play sport, you see a real movement afoot to return to some kind of, for kids' mental health, for their physical health and all that kind of thing. I mean, there was some debate at some point in time, and maybe in all the provinces, as to whether or not schools were going to reopen. And the kind of running joke was, and I think Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia and Brunswick, were all, in this Atlantic bubble, we're in very, very good shape as compared to the rest of the country, especially now, but particularly in the lead up to school. So the idea that we weren't going to open schools was almost like a civil war would have broken out, I think, if schools had not reopened. It almost didn't matter what everybody else was doing. And I think that you've seen that now, probably now in the second wave, more than even the first wave. In the first wave, you kind of saw, I think, as a country, we were kind of generally all following the same rules, but we are in a completely different place now than Alberta and Manitoba and Ontario. And Quebec is always kind of, they've had their struggles throughout, but the others definitely had like a, kind of peaks and valleys. So I would say that really depends on who you talk to. It would be interesting. Like we are at Malin Center. We, because I think part of the reason is that the private hockey, figure skating, or even just minor hockey associations, the restrictions in terms of the number of children on the bench and on the ice and the distance they need to keep has meant, and the cleaning in between has meant that ice time is, there's less of it. So from basically 3 o'clock in the afternoon until midnight, both weekends, both days of the weekend, I'm sorry, our ice is spoken for. It's completely booked. Nobody has, I guess, on social media or otherwise, expressed an opinion about the fact that we shouldn't be open and we shouldn't be encouraging sport, because that just hasn't happened. So I would say, generally speaking, there's enough people who kind of say, okay, if I choose not to do that, that's my choice. But it's there for people who feel that they can, safely gather and play sports and so on.
Mhm.
Convention center is a little bit different. There's not as much local use of that facility. That obviously is built and was intended, the primary intention is to house national conferences. So if there's no conferences, then there's not a lot of activity happening there. We are reaching out to local groups, like I said, the courts and whomever else, to see if there's a local demand to use that space. I will say, and this is not a slight against public health, I think that they are what seems to be misinformation and like messaging at times, I think, is to their credit. They're just humans like the rest of us. They're thrown into this situation. They're having to evaluate these plans. Information is coming to them not much longer before it goes public, and they're making decisions based on the information they have at the time. Now, I will say, we never did find ourselves in the same situation that Bobby explained, where basically you're watching the news and finding out at that moment that now venues are open. There was always a lead up to say, okay, as of next Friday, venues will be permitted to open. So if we as a venue decided that it was economically feasible for us to put our ice back down in the middle of the summer, we had a little bit of time at least to figure that out, even from a staffing perspective, like how are you going to do all that? So we didn't at least find ourselves in that situation. I would say one of the other things I would add, though, is, and I think we've probably touched on it, is that we are held to such a high standard. And I don't want to, I guess, create, differences between us and other venues, but I look around and I see the things that are happening at venues that, whether they choose not to follow the rules, whether they don't know what the rules are, whether they don't care what the rules are, I don't know. In terms of distancing and people, the capacity at a particular time. So I guess what I'm saying is that we are submitting these plans and we are playing by the rules, and I don't have any intention of doing anything else but play by the rules. I know that there's other groups who are not doing that, and I just wonder, okay, at some point, not that I'm advocating to not play by the rules, but at some point we're losing business because other people are taking their chances and are willing to take those chances that we as a municipally owned two venues are not. We're not going to be able to do that. So, for example, you have other venues that have hosted wedding shows. I can tell you for certain that the number of people we have the biggest space. I know that because we have the biggest indoor space in the province. Mm-hmm. So if I look online and I see how many exhibitors are in that space, I can make some assumptions about the fact that plan, that if I submitted that, would never have gotten approval. But somehow the event is happening in another building. And so that, the optics of that is difficult as a venue operator, because it looks like we're sitting on our hands doing nothing. And that's not the case. We have plan on top of plan on top of plan. What did you say, Bobby? 8 million, 1 point, whatever version of it. Like, they're in there, and but I don't know. I can't really put my finger on it. And I think I think part of it is a fear on behalf of the government and public health, to give the go-ahead for an event in the largest facility, and then something happens. I really do think that that's one of the major, I guess, fears that they have, and is resulting in. I'll give you one quick example, and this was way back when they initially got to gathering sizes that were greater than 20. So we had. Well, it was supposed to be a liberal leadership convention. It was not anything of the like. It was all done virtually. And ultimately there was 2 people in the running. They got them together. It was August the 3rd. At the beginning, our plan submitted had 50 people in the ballroom. That was the max gathering. But that didn't allow for people at the back of house who, we had some water, we had people doing check-in, but they weren't in the bubble as such. In the end, across the entire building, 50,000 square foot building, all we were allowed was 50 people. So that meant that even in their group, it got down to like the two delegates, or well, there were no delegates, they were all online, and the two gentlemen who had put their names forward, like they had to make a decision as to whether their parents could come. Like that's what it got down to, because there was so few people allowed. But at the same time, we knew that, for example, bars downtown had this kind of like rule of 50% your normal capacity. As long as you only have 50% your normal capacity, you're good. So that could be 75 people.
Yeah.
So it has been a challenge, and you just keep the lines of communication open, and see what you can do to the best of your ability without putting anybody or jeopardizing any of the rules that are in place or the safety precautions that are in place. Because again, at the end of the day, nobody wants an outbreak, and certainly nobody wants an outbreak related to something, as I say, frivolous as a sporting event, right? It's not like it happened when people were converging in a hospital or something like that. So gonna try and keep it real, I suppose.
Absolutely. I wish I had a crystal ball handy, but I want everyone to pull out their crystal ball for this next question. I'll first ask our panelists, and I'd really like to open the floor for everybody else who's on the call today, just to provide some wisdom for what you anticipate will carry forward. But essentially for event organizers, for the general public, for venue operators, I'd like you to tell us what elements of adjustments we've made for COVID-19 that we anticipate will remain post-pandemic. Are there certain things that will remain on the forefront? One, for instance, that I will ensure with every new major event property that we secure, that there'll be a clear outline and policy with regards to cancellation due to pandemic outbreak, and what sort of responsibilities each partner has in that process. So what other, I think that most of us, we've all implemented new plexiglass at our point of sale terminals. That likely is a good idea and probably should remain post-pandemic. What else do you guys think will remain for years to come? How about Bobby? Make sure he's still there.
You got me. I was sleeping with my eyes open again. There's lots of things that I think we're going to see stick around, and we've kind of beat the dead horse on all of our sanitation processes. You mentioned the plexi. I think what we're going to see is a lot of changes in regard to like inload outload of actual events, and I think you'll see a newfound appreciation for those local craft festivals and different local type activities, and I think you're going to focus more on a lot of different things. So some of the readings that I've kind of been taking is and what I've noticed locally with the distributors is there's been an increased shift to outdoors and, ATVs, paddle boards, mountain biking, different things that may not have been mainstream before. I think you're going to see those, and I think some of those are going to stick around. There's been a great shift in regard to returning to the 80s and 90s, parenting styles of, we may not have as much, we may not be on the go as much. So we're going to see some choices potentially being made that people may make different choices of what events they attend, how many they attend, how is it good for them. And in the facility itself, I think we're going to see a lot of different technological advancements in regard to how we actually offer things that we do, so right now you have kids changing in the parking lot, so you may see some technological things that are implemented to allow them to know when their 15 minutes prior to entering the building is, so there's lots of different things that are going to stick around. I'm excited to see some of the things that are going to be here for the long term, but mostly, just to end it off on my portion, I can't wait to get back to events.
Absolutely, I'll second that. I think all of us will second that. Susan, is there anything that you think really will stick or should stick as a result to all these adjustments that have been made?
Well, I think definitely when you get used to putting hand sanitizer on 15,000 times a day, that's going to be a habit that's not going to go away very fast. And I think that's good, you know. And I think cleaning protocols are going to stay. You look at the grocery stores spraying down the carts. It takes them 2 minutes to do that, and they're killing some germs. So I think that there will be cleaning protocols that will stay. And I was just on the TIAC Congress before I jumped onto this panel, and I was on with an airport group, and they actually were mentioning some rapid testing that they did. They actually got passengers at Pearson to rapid test themselves. They had a kit that they could take home with them then, and they tested themselves when they arrived in the airport, then 7 days after, and then 10 days after. And the results showed that 90% of people tested negative in their sample. And the 10% that tested positive tested, 8% of them on the first go around. And the rest of them tested within the 7 days. So I think those sorts of things are going to be here to stay for a while.
Absolutely.
I would
Sheena?
say the biggest words that I can think of in terms of change is risk. Like, this whole thing has brought the idea of risk in very many different forms to like, just that brought that lens to everything. So whether it is, cleaning and increasing your sanitization, either frequencies or just the protocols, because there's a risk associated with not doing that. Whether it's something that's written into the venue rental contract to be a little bit more stringent in terms of cancellation, allowing for, we've always had a force majeure clause, but I can tell you right now, force majeure, I've had more conversations about force majeure in the last 3 months than I've had in probably 12 years. So there's that will definitely be on everybody's radar. Insurance. I mean, just the cost alone for groups to go out and get insurance now to come in with their event. And maybe that will, once a vaccine comes into play, maybe that will die off a little bit again and the prices will come back around. But right now, it's like you almost have to question, what are we paying insurance for? Because they don't protect you against a whole bunch of things. The premiums are astronomical. The deductible is astronomical. So it's like, holy cow, what is the objective here? Or what is the, what are you actually gaining here? So I think risk is just bringing that mindset to everything that we do. From our end, I don't know about other venues, we had for years tried to bring in a policy whereby there was no reentry. We didn't want people to go out for a smoke, for example. Smoking is still a very, I think in terms of the Canadian population, I think Newfoundland and Labrador still has a very significant percentage of smokers. So we always knew that was going to be a bit of a deterrent for people in terms of their event experience, that they want to be able to leave and go outside and come back in. We are going to probably take this opportunity to say, we're going to minimize that traffic flow and we're going to, eliminate that re-entry process, both from a secure standpoint in terms of, which is one of the lenses we always try to keep to it, but also just minimizing that amount of traffic flow. So we might take the opportunity and use it for that benefit. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the vaccine and getting back to some level of normalcy will kind of calm down a bunch of things that we see in our everyday, the masks and the hand sanitizer, and it'll get back to as many people who come in and go right to the hand sanitizer. Those people are always they're going to do that, I think. But yeah, I would say other things like you suggested, the plexiglass that's in place, we're probably not going to take that down. Why would we take it down at this point now, right? So yeah, I would say that the mindset of risk is probably the biggest change for us.
Mm-hmm. And you anticipate the new norm will be a more shared risk amongst stakeholders and rights holders. I think that we'll see, like never before, more communities co-hosting events or negotiations with rights holders where there's shared risk there. I'm also an optimist in thinking that I wish I could fast forward to what I kind of envision as this major funnel effect where all these postponed events and Atlantic and national and international championships that are postponed, and recognizing that we are still, and knock on wood, the safest region in North America. So I think that we'll continue to get back to the major roles that we play in our venues and hosting major sporting events, and I hope that the public also recognizes that for some, unfortunately, you have to lose it before you understand its value. And I think that really the worst thing and maybe the best thing that could happen is a pandemic, and you see the major impacts that are a result of these cancellations and the whole supply chain of goods and services that benefit from it. So I'm hoping that we can soon get there and continue to take the necessary steps forward to further reopen our facilities and begin hosting controlled gatherings again. But I will ask, we do have 34 representatives on the call today, and I'd love to hear from some others, just relative to any of the conversation that we've had today, or what you see in your crystal ball as far as what you think will remain in the sector as we move forward. Anybody on there that'd like to chime in? None of you are this shy in person, so you don't need to be on a call.
Well, then I guess I'll chime in then, because I'm not shy. No, just kidding. I think to what Sheena said as well, I just finished taking a pandemic meeting and event design course for the last few weeks to kind of understand what these in-person meetings will look like. And, of course, the majority of the people were from the United States on this course. But I think they were right. In a sense, it's like post 9/11, where back then we thought, oh my God, all these new security measures and, the world was kind of a different place. But now it's like our new normal, where you're like, yeah, of course, you get screened a million times when you go through. But then that also gave people a sense of security. And then things went back to normal. Everybody, still flies, and you kind of get used to it. So I think, as Sheena said, is really about mitigating risk moving forward. So they'll just expect that some of those measures might stay in place, and you know what, we'll kind of forget about it. We might not have a mask, or we might not be using hand sanitizer as much, but for event planners, for venues, it will be all about how do we mitigate risk now that, we've been through this pandemic. So people are just going to expect it. And you know what, we might not go back to what we used to consider a new normal, but it will just become a new normal for everybody afterwards. So we'll still meet in person, that's for sure. People definitely still want to have meetings. We're looking forward to those days, and we just kind of have to keep going through.
Absolutely. Anybody else like to chime in? I can remember, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago that the challenges we faced hosting major events was the grief that some patrons would give us for taking a peek inside a handbag or asking them to empty their water bottle before entering the premises. And now they're much more cooperative than they were back then, even during these difficult times. So hopefully we can move forward in more of a unison with the general public. And I should say, just before we do drop off the call here, just thank you to the presenters for your willingness to share your key learnings with us today, and thank you to the other 34 attendees that joined in on the session. At the conclusion of each session, we draw a name from all the participants to win a gift card for a local restaurant or cafe. So our presenters have all selected their favorite go-to spots. So Sheena selected a gift card from the Quiddy Viddy Brewery. Bobby, you selected a gift card from the Shake Shed in Fredericton. Susan, you selected the New Glasgow Lobster Supper's Mile High Lemon Meringue Pie. That's pretty specific selection. Love it. And I selected Funday Scoops here in Truro. So through this collaboration, we're happy to be able to give back to the hospitality sector through this partnership. And I will encourage everybody to chime in again next week. We will have an update directly from Sport Tourism Canada from the COVID-19 task force that they've assigned. And the purpose of the task force was to develop an action plan for the responsible, safe, and effective reopening of the sport tourism industry. And like we say, it's a $1.8 billion impact here in Atlantic Canada. It's nearly $7 billion impact in the rest of the country. And members of the task force will provide us an update on their efforts and next steps, and hopefully we can continue to collaborate here in Atlantic Canada and across the rest of the country together. So next webinar is November 25th at 2 p.m. and hopefully you can accept the invite, and we'll see you then. So again, appreciate everybody joining the call, and we look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care.